Desperate Maid brings her daughter to work without permission, and the millionaire is shocked. The ceiling light flickered 3 times, then went completely dark. The small apartment was swallowed by darkness, leaving only the faint whistle of wind slipping through the old window frame and the soft, steady breathing of a sleeping child. Emily Carter lay motionless on the thin mattress pressed against the floor, her eyes wide open, fixed on the damp-stained ceiling. Her throat tightened, as if an invisible hand were squeezing it, stealing her breath. The power was out again. Without needing to check the clock, Emily knew it was already past midnight. They always cut the electricity at this hour, a cruel reminder that the bill still hadn't been paid. 18-month-old Lily Carter snuggled closer to her mother. The child's body was so small and light that every time Emily held her, a sharp ache pierced her heart. Lily never cried loudly like other children. She never threw tantrums. She only whimpered softly, then opened her deep blue eyes to look at her mother with an expression that was both frightened and resigned, an expression that should never exist on a child's face. Emily brushed her fingers through Lily's soft hair, feeling every tiny breath rise and fall. She was only 25, yet on nights like this, Emily felt as if she had already lived the life of a 40-year-old woman, exhausted down to her bones. On the wobbly wooden table in the corner of the room, an old phone with a cracked screen vibrated softly. Emily reached for it, and the weak glow of the screen became the only light in the apartment. A new message. Urgently need a cleaner. Central office. Work tonight. Triple pay. Must be reliable. Emily read the message over and over, her heart pounding in her chest. Triple pay. That amount would be enough to cover this month's rent, enough to buy new diapers for Lily, enough to fill the empty refrigerator, at least for a few days. She turned to look at her daughter. Lily had already sat up, clutching her old stuffed rabbit, her wide eyes fixed on her mother. She didn't ask anything. Lily rarely asked questions, as if she had already learned that in this world not every question had an answer. "No," Emily whispered, tightening her grip on the phone. "Mommy can't take you with me." But other images immediately flooded her mind. The eviction notice taped to the door, the half-empty pack of crackers in the cupboard, the very last diaper Lily was wearing. Emily closed her eyes and drew in a deep breath. There was no choice. If she didn't go to work, they would be out on the street. Emily opened her eyes. Lily's gaze was still fixed on her, quiet, trusting without question. Emily's heart twisted. She leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'm sorry, my love," she whispered like a prayer. "This is the only way I have." In the darkness of that poor little apartment, a decision had been made, and it would change both of their lives, forever. Emily stood for a long time in front of the cracked mirror inside the cramped bathroom. The weak beam from her phone's flashlight fell across her pale face, exposing the dark circles beneath her eyes and the exhaustion she could not hide. She looked older than her 25 years. Emily slipped into the thickest coat she owned, an old jacket frayed at the cuffs, once belonging to the man who had walked away the moment he learned she was pregnant. She zipped it up to her chin, then bent down to lift Lily and press her close to her chest. "Stay still, sweetheart," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Just for a little while." Lily didn't respond. She only curled deeper into her mother's arms. Her tiny body was so light that it frightened Emily, afraid that if she loosened her grip, her daughter might disappear, like everything else in her life. Emily tucked the stuffed rabbit inside her coat, along with Lily, adjusting it so the child's face was hidden. She didn't know whether what she was doing was right or wrong. She only knew that if she didn't do this, by morning they would have nowhere left to go. Outside, the night wind cut cold. Emily locked the apartment door, a flimsy door with a loose lock she wasn't even sure still worked. She paused for a second, staring at it, as if saying goodbye to a part of her life she didn't know she would ever return to. The night bus was almost empty. Emily took a seat in the very back, hunching forward to shield Lily. Every time the bus jolted, she tightened her arms, her heart clenching in fear that Lily would wake and cry. But Lily didn't cry. She opened her eyes, looked around cautiously, then rested her cheek against her mother's chest. Emily lowered her head and kissed her daughter's hair, holding on to that fragile warmth as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. 40 minutes later, the bus stopped in front of a towering skyscraper, brilliant lights reflecting off cold glass. Emily lifted her gaze, her throat dry. Wright Financial Group. The building looked like another world, a place where power, money, and safety existed. A world completely opposite from the dark apartment she had just left behind. Emily pulled her coat tighter and stepped through the service entrance. The scent of polished marble and high-grade disinfectant made her feel out of place. A middle-aged man with a name badge on his chest glanced at her. "Emily Carter?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, quietly but firmly. "I'm the night supervisor," he said briskly. "You're just in time. We need an office on the top floor cleaned urgently. The chairman just left in not a very stable condition." Emily swallowed. "The office? Will I be alone?" "That's right. The entire floor has only one office. It needs to be done before morning." He handed her an elevator card and a cleaning cart. "Service elevator is over there." Emily nodded, not daring to ask more. She only prayed everything would go quickly. The faster it was done, the less risk Lily would be discovered. Inside the elevator, cold fluorescent lights reflected Emily's face in the steel mirror. Lily stirred slightly inside her coat. Emily began to hum softly, the old melody she always used whenever her daughter was afraid. "Sleep now, my little angel." The elevator doors opened at the top floor. The corridor was eerily silent. Thick carpet, abstract paintings on the walls, and dim golden lights created a sense of luxury that felt cold and distant. At the end of the hall stood a large, heavy wooden door, tightly shut. Emily took a deep breath and pushed the cleaning cart forward. She did not know that behind that door was not only a wrecked office waiting to be cleaned, but the beginning of a chain of events that would tear open the past, expose the powerful, and completely change the fate of 3 strangers forever. Emily flipped the switch. The ceiling lights came on, and the sight before her made her freeze. The vast office looked as if it had just been through a storm. Papers were scattered across the floor, folders torn open, swivel chairs knocked over, books strewn about as if hurled in a fit of rage. On the surface of the expensive wooden desk, a glass tumbler lay shattered, its sharp fragments glittering under the lights. Emily swallowed hard. The manager had been right. This was not simply a messy office. These were the remnants of a breakdown. She gently pushed the cleaning cart inside, parked it against the wall, then loosened her coat slightly so Lily could breathe more easily. The baby remained quietly nestled against her chest, wide-eyed, silently taking in the unfamiliar room. No crying, no fussing, just stillness, as if she had already learned that the safest way to protect herself was to make no sound. Emily pulled 2 leather armchairs near the window together, laid a thin blanket over them, and carefully placed Lily between them. "I'm right here," she whispered. Emily began to work. She bent down to gather the papers scattered across the floor. Most were financial reports, charts, columns of figures she could not fully understand. But certain words kept repeating themselves on the pages, standing out like dark ink stains on white paper. Losses, investigation, fraud. A chill ran down Emily's spine. She did not know what was happening here, but it was clear the owner of this office was standing at the edge of collapse. She stepped toward the large window and stooped to pick up a broken photo frame lying beside the desk. One corner of the glass was cracked, but the photograph inside remained intact. Emily stopped. In the photo was a tall man in his early 30s, dressed in a suit, with deep, solemn eyes. He was smiling, a rare smile, not the polite kind. In his arms was a little girl, about 3 or 4 years old, with brown hair and a face glowing with happiness. On the back of the frame, a handwritten note read, "Daniel and Sophie, your last birthday." Emily's hands began to tremble. She knew that feeling, the feeling when a short line of words holds an entire lifetime of loss. Your last birthday. No explanation was needed. Emily understood exactly what had happened. She carefully set the frame back onto the desk as if afraid of hurting the memory of a stranger. In that moment, Lily's image rose in her mind, her own fragile daughter living quietly from one day to the next. Emily turned to look at Lily. The baby still sat silently, her deep blue eyes fixed on her mother. In that gaze was a sadness eerily similar to the man's eyes in the photograph. A father who had lost his child, a child who had been denied even before she could be born. Two different kinds of pain, but the same empty space. Emily took a deep breath and forced the thoughts aside. She did not have time to let emotion interfere. She needed to finish the job, get paid, and go home before dawn. She turned her back on the photograph and continued cleaning. Emily was bent over wiping the surface of the desk when the elevator bell rang. The sound wasn't loud, but in the absolute silence of the top floor, it rang out like a warning. Emily's body went rigid. Her hand froze in midair, her heart pounding so hard she was afraid Lily could hear it. That couldn't be right. The manager had been very clear. The building was almost empty, and the CEO would not be returning until morning. Emily tried to calm herself, but the next moment, the voices of several men drifted down the hallway. "Daniel, you need to calm down before making any decisions." "Calm down? Jason embezzled company money, millions of dollars, and you're telling me to calm down?" Emily recognized that deep, pressure-filled voice immediately. It was the man from the photograph, Daniel Wright. Her throat went dry. Lily stirred in the corner of the room as if sensing the shift in the air. Emily spun around and rushed to her daughter. "No, no, please," she whispered, lifting Lily and pressing her tightly to her chest. "Stay quiet, sweetheart." She scanned the office in desperation. There was nowhere to hide. The large door leading to the hallway was too close. If they stepped inside, she would be discovered immediately. There was only one place left, the private restroom. Emily didn't think any further. Holding Lily, she hurried into the restroom behind the office, closing the door as softly as possible, so carefully that even her breathing felt dangerously loud. The small room sank into darkness. The enclosed space immediately frightened Lily. She began to squirm. "Shh, shh, please," Emily whispered into her ear, her trembling hand gently covering Lily's mouth. "Just a moment. Mommy's begging you." But Lily didn't understand. She hated the dark, hated tight spaces, and above all, she hated feeling threatened. A small hiccup escaped her, then a faint cry followed, very soft, but in this silent room it sounded terrifyingly loud. Emily began to rock her gently, humming brokenly. "Sleep now, my little angel." Outside, footsteps entered the office. A drawer slid open, a chair scraped across the floor. "Who cleaned in here?" a cold voice asked. "I sent the night cleaning crew up here," another replied. "Good. At least something is still functioning in this mess." Emily squeezed her eyes shut. Every passing second felt like needles piercing her skin. Lily's crying grew louder, not a screaming cry, but a panicked, choked sob, like that of a child already used to not being answered. "Do you hear that?" Daniel said, his voice slowing. "Hear what?" "Sounds like a child." Emily knew it was over. Lily's crying became clearer. She was terrified, beating her tiny hands against her mother's shoulder, trying to escape. Emily crushed her against her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't," she whispered, not knowing whom she was begging. Footsteps moved closer, then stopped right outside the restroom door. "Is someone in there?" Daniel called out. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat was locked tight. Her mind flooded with terrible possibilities: being fired, sued, reported to the police, accused of endangering her child. Her arms trembled. The door slowly opened. Blinding light spilled into the dark room, forcing Emily to squint. She collapsed to the floor, clutching Lily to her chest by pure instinct, shielding her child from the stares of the unfamiliar men. 3 men froze. The man in front was tall, broad-shouldered, with slightly tousled dark hair and deep brown eyes now widened in shock. Daniel Wright, CEO of Wright Financial Group, stared at the scene before him as if he could not believe what he was seeing. A young woman in a cleaning uniform curled on the restroom floor. In her arms, a crying child. "You—" Daniel finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" Emily lifted her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. Lily sobbed against her mother's neck, trembling. I'm sorry," Emily said, her voice breaking. "I'm the cleaner. I just came here to work." Daniel looked at the child again, his expression shifting from shock to anger. "And you think it's acceptable," he said, his voice rising, "to bring a baby into a workplace in the middle of the night like this?" Emily tightened her hold on Lily. The baby was still crying, but the sound had weakened, turning into short, exhausted sobs. Emily lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. "I know," she said hoarsely. "I know I was wrong." Daniel frowned. He had been prepared to hear mechanical apologies, clumsy excuses. What he had not been prepared for was the way this woman admitted her fault, without defensiveness, without blame, only weariness and despair. "Then why?" he asked, his voice lower, but still tight. "Why did you bring your child here?" Emily lifted her head. In that moment, Daniel saw her eyes, red-rimmed, swollen, but beneath them was something unbreakable. Not the recklessness of someone irresponsible, but the resilience of someone who had been driven to the edge. "Because I had no choice," Emily said. Her voice was soft at first, then grew steadier. "I have no one to watch her, no family, no friends, no money for rent, no money for diapers." Daniel was about to interrupt, but Emily didn't stop. "You think I want to bring my baby here near midnight?" she said, tears spilling over. "Do you think that's easy for me?" Her voice cracked. "I work 3 jobs a day. I eat less so my baby can eat. I've worn the same coat all winter because I can't afford a new one. And every single day, all I try to do is one thing: keep my child safe." Daniel stood frozen. Emily continued, as if a dam had burst. "If I don't work tonight, tomorrow morning we'll be thrown out onto the street. I didn't choose money over my child. I chose my child having a roof over her head." She broke down completely now. Tears fell into Lily's hair. The baby felt her mother's shaking and wrapped her tiny arms tighter around Emily's neck. "You can fire me," Emily said through sobs. "You can call security. You can call the police. I accept it. But don't talk to me about danger when my entire life has been a chain of days spent protecting my child from things you've never had to face." The room fell into absolute silence. The 2 men behind Daniel lowered their heads. No one dared to look directly at the scene. Daniel said nothing. He stared at the young woman collapsed on the floor, holding her child as if she were holding the whole world. Another image suddenly surfaced in his mind. Sophie, his daughter, once clinging tightly to his neck whenever she was afraid. That feeling. He had buried it for 3 long years. Daniel turned to look out into the office. His eyes unintentionally stopped on the desk where Sophie's photo frame, now carefully set upright by Emily, stood in place. The photograph remained there, silent, like a mute witness. For the first time that long night, the anger inside Daniel eased. "Step outside," he said abruptly. Emily startled, her heart tightening. "What?" one of the men behind him asked. "I said step outside," Daniel repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. The two men exchanged glances, then quickly left the office. The door shut with a dry click, leaving only 3 people in the space: Daniel, Emily, and Lily. Daniel walked forward slowly, then knelt down until he was level with Emily. "Look at me," he said. Emily hesitated, then lifted her head. Their eyes met. "You will not be fired," Daniel said. Emily blinked. What? "And I will not sue you," he continued, "but I need to understand one thing." He glanced at Lily. She had stopped crying, but was still hiding against her mother's neck, trembling. "Where is the child's father?" The question fell into the room like a bolt of lightning. Emily lowered her head. Her hands clenched tightly into the back of her own shirt, as if the moment she let go, she would shatter right there. Lily was still curled against her mother's neck, her breathing small and quick, but she was no longer crying. In that instant, hundreds of memories came crashing back, sweet promises, late-night messages, whispered words of love that had sounded so real. And then the cold, brutal silence. Emily finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "He is nowhere." Daniel frowned. "Can you be more specific?" Emily closed her eyes. When she opened them again, tears were already streaming down her cheeks. "His name is Jason Miller," she said softly. Daniel's body went rigid. For a second, he thought he had misheard. "What did you just say?" Daniel asked, his voice dropping. Emily lifted her head, her gaze exhausted but resolute. "Lily's father is Jason Miller," she repeated. "Your partner." The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. Daniel shot to his feet so abruptly that his knee slammed into the edge of the desk behind him. A sharp pain flared, but he didn't feel it. Everything inside his head was spinning. Jason, the friend he had trusted for more than 10 years. The man who had built Right Financial with him from nothing. The same man now suspected of embezzling company funds. "That's impossible," Daniel said, as if speaking to himself. "That can't be true?" Emily shook her head weakly. "I wish it weren't." Daniel turned back to her. "You're saying Jason has a child, and he abandoned you and Lily?" Emily took a deep breath, forcing her voice not to break. 2 years ago, I worked in the annex of this building," she said. "Jason was in charge of a project. We saw each other often. He was very kind, attentive. He told me he loved me." Daniel closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. 3 months, Emily continued. "We were together for 3 months. He said he was serious, that he would introduce me to his family." She let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "When I told him I was pregnant, everything changed." Daniel opened his eyes. "What did he do?" "He became furious," Emily said. "He accused me of trapping him, said I knew he was rich, and got pregnant on purpose to cling to him." Her voice trembled. "He blocked me on every platform. When Lily was born, I sent him photos, messages. There was no reply. Then he threatened me. He said that if I dared put his name on the birth certificate, he would use lawyers to prove that I was unstable and take my child away." A cold fury spread through Daniel's chest. "Do you have any proof?" he asked, his voice rough. Emily nodded. "I kept the old messages, the photos of us together, and I have this." She adjusted Lily in her arms, gently turning the child around. With almost sacred care, Emily brushed aside the soft hair at the back of Lily's neck. Daniel leaned down and froze. Right where her neck met her spine was a small, pink-red, heart-shaped birthmark, clear and unmistakable. "Jason has the same birthmark," Emily whispered. "Same shape, same place. I've seen it." Daniel staggered back a step, as if struck in the chest. He remembered it clearly. Jason had once bragged about that birthmark back when they were students, had said it was unique, that only he had it. A coincidence like this was impossible. Daniel collapsed into the leather chair behind his desk, his hands pressed against his forehead. For several seconds, he said nothing. Jason hadn't only betrayed the company, hadn't only stolen money, he had abandoned his own child. Daniel lifted his head. His eyes now held no trace of hesitation. "You and Lily will not face this alone," he said slowly. "Not anymore." Emily looked at him, confused. "You mean—" Daniel stood up, his voice low, cold and resolute. "I'm calling Jason here, right now." Emily's eyes widened. "And this time," Daniel continued, "he won't be able to run." Daniel did not give Emily time to protest. He pulled out his phone and dialed quickly. His voice was low, clipped, carrying no unnecessary emotion. "Jason, come up to my office, now." "Daniel, it's almost midnight." "Now." Daniel ended the call. The silence that followed was so heavy, Emily could hear her own heartbeat. Lily remained in her mother's arms, her deep blue eyes fixed on Daniel, as if sensing the storm that was forming. "You don't need to say anything," Daniel said, turning to Emily. "I'll handle this." Emily wanted to object, wanted to say she didn't need saving. But the truth was, for the first time in a year and a half, she was not facing the darkness alone. And that made her both afraid and relieved. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors slid open. Footsteps echoed down the luxurious hallway. A tall man entered the office, irritation written all over his face. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, the faint scent of alcohol lingering around him. Jason Miller. "What the hell is this, Daniel?" Jason frowned. "You dragged me up here in the middle of the night?" Then his eyes landed on Emily. Jason froze. The color drained from his face almost instantly. "What is she doing here?" Jason snapped. "Are you stalking me now?" Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself between Jason and Emily. "You know her," Daniel said, his calm frightening. "So don't pretend," Jason scoffed. "I've only met her a few times, nothing important." "Oh?" Daniel tilted his head. "Then what about the child?" Jason glanced at Lily. For a split second, panic flickered across his eyes. Quick, but Daniel didn't miss it. "Don't bring up that crazy nonsense," Jason said with a forced laugh. "She's a gold digger. She trapped me." Emily trembled, but this time she did not lower her head. "You know Lily is your daughter," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You've seen her birthmark." Jason stiffened. "What birthmark?" asked another man, Michael Harris, the company's attorney, whom Daniel had quietly summoned. Emily turned Lily around and brushed aside her hair. The entire room fell silent. "Jason," Daniel said slowly, "take off your jacket." "What?" Jason scoffed. "Have you lost your mind?" "Take it off," Daniel repeated, his voice leaving no room for refusal. "Or I'll have security do it for you." Jason looked around. No allies, no escape. Slowly, he removed his suit jacket, then unbuttoned his shirt. When he turned his back, everyone saw the heart-shaped birthmark at the nape of his neck. Exactly like Lily's. Same shape, same place. Michael inhaled sharply. "That is very strong biological evidence." Jason spun around. "It's just a coincidence. Lots of people have birthmarks." "In the same shape," Daniel cut in. "In the same place, within the same family?" Daniel stepped closer to Jason. His eyes were ice cold. "You abandoned your own child," Daniel said, "and you stole company funds. Those two things you can't deny." Jason switched tactics. "Daniel, listen to me. She's unstable. She brought the child to work in the middle of the night. She's dangerous." Emily let out a painful laugh. "I'm dangerous?" she said. "The dangerous one is you, the one who ran when his child needed him." Daniel turned to Michael. Suspend Jason immediately. Revoke all company access. Prepare the financial investigation file. You can't do this, Jason shouted. I'm a partner. You were a partner, Daniel replied coldly. From this moment on, you are suspended. Jason cast one last hateful glance at Emily. You'll regret this. Daniel stepped forward, his voice low and lethal. You will not go near her or Lily ever again. Jason turned and stormed out of the office, the door slamming behind him. Silence stretched. Emily breathed hard, her body trembling. Lily snuggled closer into her mother, but this time she did not cry. She looked at Daniel, attentively, curiously. Daniel turned to Emily. This isn't over, he said, but from now on you won't be fighting alone. After Jason left, the office fell into a very different kind of silence. Not the explosive tension from before, but a heavy emptiness, as if everyone had just exhaled after a storm. Emily remained standing in the same spot, holding Lily tightly. Her legs felt so weak that without the wall behind her, she might have collapsed. Are you okay? Daniel asked, his voice much gentler now. Emily nodded out of reflex, but her whole body was still trembling. Lily pressed her cheek against her mother's neck, her tiny hand clutching at Emily's shirt as if afraid of being separated. Michael, the lawyer, closed his laptop. Daniel, we need to speak privately. No, Daniel replied immediately. Whatever needs to be said can be said here. Michael glanced at Emily and Lily, then nodded. Jason won't let this go. When men like him are cornered, they tend to act recklessly. Emily's face drained of color. She looked down at Lily, her heart tightening. I just want to leave, she said softly. I don't want to cause more trouble. You're not the one causing trouble, Daniel said. He is? He paused for a moment, then continued, his voice dropping. But Michael is right. Jason knows who you are. He knows where Lily is. I can't let you go back to that old apartment. Emily shook her head immediately. No, I can't. Listen to me, Daniel interrupted, gently this time. Just temporarily, until we finish the legal procedures. I don't trust Jason to act rationally. Emily let out a bitter smile. But in this city, I don't have anyone I know, and I don't have enough money to move somewhere else. Daniel met her gaze steadily. Then move into my house. Emily was about to protest, but Daniel continued, speaking slowly, each word clearly considered. You don't have stable electricity. Your rent is overdue. You don't have enough food for the coming week. And you just brought your child into a dangerous place because you had no other choice. Emily lowered her head. Those words were not accusations. They were bare truths. She held Lily tighter. She had fought alone for far too long. She had grown used to refusing help for fear of owing anyone. But now exhaustion weighed heavily on every part of her. If it's only for a short while, she said quietly. Just until things get better. Daniel nodded. As long as you need. You can leave whenever you want. 20 minutes later, they were in the private elevator. Lily stirred as the elevator moved. She shifted, opened her eyes, her gaze unfamiliar and drowsy. Emily immediately began to hum softly, her voice trembling but familiar. Daniel stood across from her, watching in silence. When Lily started to whimper faintly, he hesitated for a second, then spoke. May I hold her? Emily startled. She isn't used to... I know, Daniel said at once. If not, I understand. Emily looked at Lily. The child was tired, eyes wet, breathing fast. She hesitated, then slowly nodded. You can try. Daniel extended his arms very slowly, as if afraid of frightening her. When Emily transferred Lily into his arms, she braced herself for crying, but Lily did not cry. She opened her eyes and looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then, instead of struggling, She rested her head against his shoulder. Emily held her breath. Daniel stood completely still, as if the slightest movement might shatter the moment. He could feel the small warmth in his arms, a painfully familiar feeling. She isn't crying," Emily whispered, unable to believe it. Daniel swallowed. "Maybe she knows." "Knows what?" Emily asked. "That," Daniel said softly. "She's safe here." The car stopped at the gates of a large estate. The iron gates opened slowly. Garden lights turned on, illuminating the stone-paved path leading to a solemn 3-story house. An elderly woman opened the door. "Mr. Daniel." "I'm sorry for waking you, Mrs. Thompson," Daniel said. "This is Emily and Lily. They'll be staying here for a while." Emily looked at Lily in Daniel's arms, her gaze softening. "I'll prepare a room right away." Emily and Lily were led upstairs. The room was spacious and immaculate, carrying the soft scent of new fabric and faint flowers. In the corner stood a wooden crib, delicate star-shaped toys hanging gently above it. "Emily," Daniel spoke from behind her, "this room used to belong to my daughter." Emily turned around, unconsciously holding her breath. "Sophie," Daniel said quietly. 3 years ago. Cancer." He paused for a moment. "I've kept this room exactly the same ever since. But perhaps it's time for it to be used again." Emily felt her throat tighten. I'm so sorry." Daniel nodded, saying nothing more. The battle began only 3 days later. Jason Miller did not remain silent, as Emily had hoped. On the contrary, he struck back quickly, forcefully, and ruthlessly, exactly as Daniel had predicted. Daniel's attorney, Michael Harris, arrived at the mansion early one morning, carrying a thick folder of documents. Emily sat across from him, her hands resting on her lap, her palms soaked with sweat. Lily was playing on the rug nearby, fitting together colorful wooden blocks, occasionally glancing up at the adults with curious eyes. "Jason has hired one of the most expensive law firms in New York," Michael said bluntly. "He is accusing you of deliberately getting pregnant for financial gain." Emily went pale. "I never—" "I know," Michael raised a hand to stop her. "But that's not all." He opened the folder and slid a stack of printed pages across the table. "He submitted conversations between the two of you. The messages show you demanding money and threatening to destroy his reputation." Emily trembled as she stared at the printed pages. Those words were not hers. "These are forged," she whispered. "I never wrote any of this." "I know," Michael said firmly, "but we have to prove it." Emily rushed upstairs and brought down her old phone, its screen cracked and worn. She sat with Michael for hours, combing through every old conversation, every photo, every unsent message, every forgotten backup. Daniel stood in the doorway, silently watching. His jaw tightened as he read the real messages, where Jason had called Emily crazy, a parasite, and where he threatened to take the baby if you ever bother me again. "He will not win," Daniel said quietly, like a vow. At the same time, Daniel hired private investigators. What they uncovered plunged the room into heavy silence more than once. Jason had not abandoned Lily alone. He had done it many times. 3 other women in 3 different cities. The same pattern. Approach, promise, disappear when pregnancy occurred or when commitment was demanded. 2 of them had agreed to testify. The 3rd was afraid, but considering it. And it did not end there. Jason had been embezzling company funds for over 2 years, not as a one-time incident. The amount could reach tens of millions. When the first hearing took place, Emily could barely breathe as she stepped into the courtroom. The room was small, lit by cold lights, lined with rigid wooden benches. Jason was already there, impeccably dressed, seated between 2 attorneys with a facade of confidence. His eyes swept over Emily, cold and contemptuous. Jason's lawyer attacked immediately. "Your Honor," he said, "we believe that Ms. Emily Carter is unfit to care for a child. She brought her baby to her workplace at night, hid the child in a restroom, and placed the baby in dangerous conditions." Emily rose instinctively. "I had no choice," she cried, her voice breaking. "If I hadn't gone to work that night, we would have been thrown out onto the street." "Order!" The judge struck the gavel. Michael stood. "Your Honor, may I ask, where was the child's father during those 18 months?" No one answered. Michael opened his tablet and read aloud every message Jason had sent Emily when she told him she was pregnant. The denials, the threats, the cold statements that completely erased Lily's existence. Jason began to sweat. "Did you send these messages, Mr. Miller?" the judge asked. Jason remained silent. "Mr. Miller?" "Yes," he finally answered, his voice shrinking. "But at the time, I panicked." "And did you ever attempt to see your child?" "No." The word fell over the courtroom like an unspoken verdict. Emily sat down, tears quietly slipping down her face. Not from fear anymore, but because at last the truth had been spoken in the light. The battle was not over, but the balance had begun to tip. The DNA test results arrived on a gloomy morning with gray clouds covering the sky. 99.9%. The number was printed in bold on the official document that Michael Harris placed on the table in front of Emily Carter. She stared at it for a few seconds, then lifted her hand to cover her mouth. Not out of surprise, but because every last doubt had finally been erased. Across the room, Daniel Wright stood by the window, his hands in his pockets. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Jason Miller had tried to delay the process, requested a second test, and accused the results of being tampered with. But there was no escape left. The final hearing came sooner than Emily had expected. The courtroom was still small and cold, but this time Emily was no longer trembling. She sat upright, hands resting on her lap, her eyes following every word of the judge as if it were her own heartbeat. "In consideration of the evidence," the judge said firmly, "first, the defendant Jason Miller is confirmed to be the biological father of the child Lily Carter, as verified by DNA testing." Jason went pale. "Second, the defendant engaged in acts of denial, abandonment, and threats toward the child's mother throughout the pregnancy and after the birth." Michael gently took Emily's hand. She did not take her eyes off the bench. "Third, the defendant has failed to demonstrate any concern for the child's welfare, while the plaintiff has raised the child alone under difficult conditions." The judge paused, then declared, "The court's ruling. The biological relationship is recognized. Full legal custody of Lily Carter is granted to the biological mother, Emily Carter. The defendant is ordered to pay child support proportional to his income, including retroactive support for the past 18 months. Emily felt a ringing in her ears. "The defendant's request for visitation is denied indefinitely," the judge continued, "until psychological evaluations are completed and further court decisions are issued." Jason sprang to his feet. "She's stealing my child." The judge struck the gavel sharply. "You had 18 months to be a father. You chose not to. Court is adjourned." The sound of the gavel echoed like the final chain being released. In the courthouse hallway, Emily could not take another step. She collapsed onto a long bench, burying her face in her hands, her whole body shaking as she cried, not from pain, but from relief. "It's over," she sobbed. "Lily is safe now." Daniel knelt in front of her, placing a hand on her shoulder, his eyes deep but gentle. "I promised," he said, "and I will always keep my word." Emily looked up at him. For the first time she allowed herself to believe that the life of mother and daughter had truly turned a new page. In the distance, sunlight began to break through the clouds. A new beginning was waiting for them. 3 months after the trial, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Not a fairy tale, not a miracle that appeared overnight, but quiet mornings, small routines, and a growing sense of safety that slowly took root. Emily officially began working for Daniel as his personal assistant. The job was not easy, but it was clear, transparent, and for the first time in her life, she was being fairly paid for her effort. She managed his schedule, organized personal files, and supported the social projects Daniel had started to care about more deeply, especially funds that helped abandoned children. Lily came with Emily to the office during the first few days until Daniel arranged a daycare near the estate. She was no longer the quiet little girl who hid behind her mother's shoulder. Lily began to laugh more. She began to run through the garden. She began to call the people around her by name, clearly and with trust. And then, on one very ordinary evening, it happened. They were having dinner when Lily spilled her glass of milk. She stared at the white puddle spreading across the table, then looked up at Daniel. "Daddy, it's spilled." The room fell silent. Emily turned sharply. "Lily, no, it's okay," Daniel said immediately. His voice trembled. He knelt down to Lily's level. "You can call me Daniel, or anything you want." Lily tilted her head, thinking very seriously, then wrapped her arms around his neck. "Daddy?" Daniel closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his cheek. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Emily found Daniel standing alone on the balcony. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "If that hurt you?" Daniel shook his head. "I thought it would hurt, but it didn't." He gave a faint smile. "It feels like my heart is learning how to beat again." Emily stood beside him. The night breeze was cool, but no longer cold. "Daniel," she said after a moment of silence, "I don't want Lily to be confused. I don't want her to—" "I understand," Daniel replied. "I don't want to replace anyone." He turned to look at her. "I just want to be there, if she allows me." Emily looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. In the days that followed, the bond between Daniel and Lily grew naturally. He took her to the park. He learned how to tie her hair. He learned patience when Lily cried over very small reasons. He told her about Sophie, not as pain, but as a beautiful memory. Emily watched quietly, and she realized what made her heart tremble was not Daniel's wealth or power. It was the way he loved a child who did not share his blood. One late evening, after Lily had fallen sound asleep, Daniel stood before Emily in the living room. "I need to say this," he said, clearly nervous. "I don't want to hide it anymore." Emily felt her heart race. "I love you," Daniel said, "not because you need to be saved, but because you are strong, resilient, and because of the way you love your daughter." Emily caught her breath. "Daniel, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just need you to know." Emily stepped forward, placing her hand over his chest, where his heartbeat was pounding. "I feel the same," she whispered. "I love you too." Daniel leaned down. Their kiss was gentle and slow, like a promise that didn't need to be spoken. From the hallway, a small voice called out, "Mama? Daddy?" They pulled apart and turned. Lily stood there, hugging her stuffed bunny, her eyes still sleepy. Emily lifted her into her arms. "Did you have a bad dream?" Lily nodded. "Family." Daniel smiled. He wrapped his arms around both of them, and in that moment they understood. Their family was not born from perfect circumstances. It was chosen every day through love.